that don't rely on tourist traffic or exclusively the holiday season. Most of my clientele lives within 15 miles of where we're standing. So I depend upon locals coming to Main Street, and I depend upon them coming several times a year. So over the past many years, those people have obviously contributed quite a bit of money. I'm very lucky to have a loyal customer base, and they've contributed quite a bit of money to pay for parking. So that's my perspective. That's where I'm coming from. I'll also say publicly, which is probably not something that a retailer should say publicly, but over the past 5 years, every single year I've had fewer transactions at my place of business. And I can document that for you if anyone's interested. I was in one of the meetings. We met, I think, over on the south side. I had trouble finding the building, to be honest with you, to talk about the parking survey. And I believe Dennis Costello from the hotel was there. Diane Holt from Apollo was there. And we talked a lot about the parking situation in Bethlehem. And at that time, I remember saying something along the lines of the following, that we have to think outside the box, that thinking in ways that aren't creative is really just kicking the can down the road. So, and I think that's borne out by the fact that what we're talking about is basically a rate increase and then reviewing every few years to see how much more we're going to raise the rates. That, to me, is not really a solution that bears well for the future of the city's retailers. So one area that I do disagree with Bruce on is I don't think parking on Main Street should ever be free, because I do think that we need to have consistent turnover, but I do think you need to take a different look at, a fresh look at the parking rates that we charge throughout the rest of the city in what is at least marginally could be considered the business district. You know, just driving to this meeting, I came down New Street, and I noticed that right at Wall Street, the meters end. Well, New Street between Wall and Broad is really, you know, there's Raven Academy there, obviously, a cemetery, and there's residential parking across the street. There's no real reason to have that area charged the same per hour as Main Street. To me, that makes no sense. To me, that's, if you look at it from a retailer standpoint, that's not as good a product as retail on Main Street. It's not as high quality parking because they're further, in most cases, away from the destination that they intend. And if I'm right, Kevin, the metered rates are the same throughout the city, correct? So an hour there is just as much as an hour on 3rd Street and an hour on, and I would endorse the idea of the variable rate parking. And I guess I have one question about that, and that question is whether or not that is something that is acted upon, like different rates on the same street, different times of day. Okay, I won't endorse that, because I will say that what customers and what people coming to downtown, I think, want in terms of parking is predictability. They want to know what the parking is going to cost them where they choose to park. I would endorse that parking be less expensive along Broad Street, where we have basically no retail between, you know, Getter and New. It seems to me that what we have is an empty movie theater that nobody's visited recently, at least not in a way that would make them want to pay parking. And so I think that is something that we really should look at. I also think, and I mentioned this to Kevin when we met in the DBA meeting, I think we have to explore other areas of exploring where to put meters, again, but with a variable rate parking idea, meaning that it would be less in new areas than it would where parking is at a high demand. Bruce mentioned that there's, it's free parking basically around City Hall, which I also have noticed. But coming down New Street, I looked where the meters stopped, and I saw they stopped on the other side of Wall Street, so that's where I parked. It doesn't take a genius to figure out. I'd also say, and this will be my final comment, because I have a tendency to go on and on. I'll also say that I think that I would endorse the idea of taking a look at this business of the rates being, the meters being enforced till 9 p.m., in areas that don't require it. I understand where there might be restaurants, again, high demand on Main Street perhaps, but certainly not in areas where, in some areas they're primarily residential communities, neighborhoods. And it just doesn't make any sense to me. So I want you to look at the idea of different rates throughout the city. I don't endorse the idea of changing it based upon market conditions, basically, because I can tell you from experience, people don't like to be surprised about parking. They want to know where they're going to park, and they want to know what it's going to cost them. So those are my thoughts. Thank you, and good luck.
Thank you. I think we have one more person in the middle.
Hi, my name is Al Worth. I live on the west side. I don't usually park too much, but because I'm a bicyclist, but I do sometimes, and we have a family car. And I've actually talked a lot about parking in the past, and I would urge much more careful consideration from the mayor and other leaders of the city of this proposal, because I think we're sort of flailing around trying to deal with the shortfall created by the last garage. And there were an awful lot of good suggestions presented tonight, an awful lot of good practices happening out there in the real world of parking that would be, I think, much less costly, much more politically painless, and much more serviceable for the citizens of the community. I would echo a lot of what has been said before, except of course what the consultant has recommended, because I don't agree very much with that at all. I'm anxious in the first place about whether in fact raising the rates will actually raise the revenue, because I think that's the death spiral that the parking garage has already put us in, the most recent one and the others also, which is that they cost more than we can reasonably charge for the spaces, so we have to find the money somewhere else. And so we're cruising around now on the streets and the neighborhoods and other places, and as Dana suggested, and I imagine the data are correct, this is much more likely to be city residents who are using these meters on the various more dispersed sites. And the long-term parkers are being subsidized, as was mentioned several times, by the short-term parkers, and the meters are going to, when the garage was built, we recommended and said, don't do this because you're going to end up making meter payers pay for it, and you're going to cause this transfer of subsidies to the big users from the little. The consultant has already recognized that these things don't make money in the first place, and yet we're still talking about building more of them, and who they would serve is a very sort of difficult to understand question, other than maybe a few notable things. Let me say one other thing. Street parking is actually the lifeblood of this city, and if, as Mr. Haynes recommended and others, that we make sure that we get the turnover and we make the parking place provide access to the real estate on the street, then everything from Mayflower, where the meters end down by my house, all the way down to where they end on the other end, on the other side of Broad. Every one of those places, people can go right to, go right to the space that they want to be and park in front of it, and as long as they don't just sit there and plop down for 2 hours or 1 hour or whatever in that space, that parking space serves that piece of real estate, and it increases the property value. If you really, there are other things we could do, which would be have short shuttle buses and stuff, but I don't want to go into that. But the more basic point is, street parking serves all the different real estate spots, all the different businesses, all of the proximity. And in fact, the mall is going down and they're putting in promenades and whatever they call that thing, the shoppies or something, out at the other mall.